Kia ora. So last week we talked about the hand tools that we use in our system, and this week we wanted to just touch on some of our electric tools that we use. So just first obviously touch on the fact that we use electric tools and why we do that. Obviously some of the more important ones are for us that we're not standing around in a cloud of carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, any other little pollutants that we don't really want to have in our environment. That's one thing for our health, but almost more important is the sounds. So when we work in this valley here, we don't have the incredibly loud sound of the tools when we're working amongst some of the native birds that we have here in our food forest. But also another really important part of it for us is that we don't have an idling motor all the time. So if you work with any kind of two-stroke system, you don't want to constantly be pull starting them again. So we found that having our, for example, our electric chainsaw, it lets us, and you would have seen that in our videos working in the food forest, we're often doing the odd cut, putting it down, dragging a branch, chopping it up with a machete, grabbing the saw again, working on it. And when we did use a chainsaw way back, we found that it was creating a very, very stressful environment for us to have this motor idling away and creating a lot of tension around maximizing the use of the chainsaw while it was on. So that's really integrated so well into the way that we work in a food forest, thinking, observing, interacting, dealing with things properly in the moment rather than cutting down a whole lot of material and then having to deal with it afterwards. So we started off with this chainsaw here, and recently we also got a hold of the latest upgraded steel chainsaw. This one's significantly more powerful than the older one that we have here, and still has similar decibels. I think it's a bit louder, but not much. Oddly enough, they've ended up with a thicker chain, so I think that's just to compensate for the higher power, so it doesn't get worn out as much as these ones. It's got a longer bar as well, but not a lot more. With this old chainsaw that we have here, we ended up finding that this tightening mechanism that Steel developed for their chainsaws and chains is a little bit flimsy. It's something that would be really nice to see an improvement over the years. It has a locking mechanism and then the tightening mechanism here, but the idea here is that it's tool free, so you out in the field and you don't have to get out your tool. But the downside is that because it's kind of overly user friendly, it has a tendency to wear out. So what we've ended up doing here is something that probably shouldn't be promoted, but we ended up taking the cover off and replacing the tightening mechanism with a simple nut, and that's worked quite well for us. And the actual benefit has been that we don't have any material getting stuck in here, which is one of the big problems that we encounter a lot with these chainsaws when we're using them, cutting down gorse and anything that might be low down in the grass, so the grass gets stuck up in here. You'll also notice that the branding has been sanded off on this bar. So if you are using one of these chainsaws with these thin bars and chains, this was a pro tip from a guy who is an arborist who actually developed this line of tools in collaboration with Steel, and he said that one of the big things with these chainsaws is they don't have the vibration of the motor running in the background, which is a hallmark of a petrol two-stroke. And what that ends up being is that you get less play in the chain, and that results in a cut that's actually perfectly as wide as a chain, and then the bar is getting pinched. So what we're finding early on is that these chainsaws have a bit of a liability to get stuck in your wood as you're cutting. So you definitely have to be much more sensitive the way that you cut, observe the tree as it's moving. But sanding off the paint will actually result in you being able to use the chain a little bit longer than you might otherwise, and reducing your pinching because of the slightly thinner width. We've also got here another little smaller steel chainsaw that we were really excited about when it came out and bought immediately. It can be used both left and right-handed, which is quite neat, whereas a lot of these other chainsaws only really work easily with one, either the right-handed and not so easy left-handed. This one is something that potentially has a role in small prunings. It doesn't work very well on small branches as they're a little bit springy, so its role's a little bit undecided yet, so we'll sort of keep using it and seeing how it works for us. Also in the steel brand, so also just coming back to the batteries, once you end up buying these battery tools, is that once you've decided to buy a certain brand, you end up kind of getting stuck with that brand all the way through. So because you have the charger and the batteries and you want to have more batteries, you end up sticking with that. We've been actually really happy with steel, so that's fine, but that's something really important to consider when you are thinking about what tools you want to buy. There's a whole lot of different types out there, like Ryobi, AEG, Makita, and they all now have the whole range, but it's worth checking what it is that you most want to get into, what kind of tools, because some of them are stronger in one suit than the other. So we found that these steel tools actually have a little bit more of a grunty feel, that feels a little bit more professional. So that's kind of where we started off with these chainsaws. And they've also seemingly got the patent on the thin chain, because you don't see them in any of the other brands. So that's worth considering. Whatever brand you do go with, keep in mind that you can most likely put a steel bar and chain on it, and that can really give you about a 20 to 30% increase in practicality with that chainsaw. So keep that in mind. We have ended up then also with a multi-tool system. You can get straight weed eaters and so, but this multi-tool system allows us to have a variety of tools that we can insert. So here we have a simple weed eater or a whippersnipper, and we have that with different blade attachments. So here is a straight fixed 3-wing steel blade, and we use that a lot for thick matted kaikuyu and anything that's kind of got a little bit of a woody stalk. And we find that this, the stringed snipper doesn't really do the job there. It gets tangled up and wound up. So it's really useful for that, but it's incredibly brutal on any fruit trees that you end up nicking, or any pipes in your undergrowth. So keep that in mind. And we do have another one that has a self-feeding mechanism, but we found that ends up getting stuck a lot. So we've sort of simplified it and gone with a simple aluminium disc, and that works quite well. We also use a simple hedge trimmer, often for our cocksfoot, and the differences between the blades that we're using ends up making a difference in how the regrowth of the plant that we've cut happens. So this one here leaves a very shredded, very brutalized finish, and that can result in poor regrowth and a bit of an unhealthy plant coming back. This one can be a much cleaner cut, but it doesn't have a good shedding system. So when you're cutting anything that you want to maintain a sort of a clean working area, it leaves you with a very masticated kind of pulp, which is quite hard to feed to animals afterwards. I think chickens are about the only ones that could maybe handle that. Whereas this one here allows us to collect a lot more what we have and lay it down on our garden beds and in our system. So we use this a lot on all our boundary plantings in our garden to give us a really nice clean cut that we can then lay down as a green mulch. And it also lets us feed it to our chickens and our guinea pigs as well, to some extent. These two multi-tools are slightly different. They have a different battery system. So this one here, you insert the standard steel battery, which means that you're holding the weight entirely in the machine, but that actually ends up being quite a nice counterweight to the tips that we use. And the benefit is that we don't have anything that gets stuck because it's a single unit. The difference with this one is that it uses a detachable battery on a cord, so you can then put this, we use it in a backpack which has all our tools that we need when we're changing heads, and it has a little power cord that plugs into the tool. So the benefit with that one obviously is less weight in the tool if you're doing long periods of work, especially if you're doing anything overhead. We can get an attachment for these that's also a extendable pole saw, and there's also a rototiller, which we don't have. But the downside with this is over time we have already replaced this. Over time, the constant movement as you're going in amongst trees, under fruit trees, around fruit trees, you get hooked, and after a while that can wear out the contacts and result in a poor connection. So I have had to replace this unit here out of the battery pack, so that's worth considering. In the hedge trimmer we also have this long handheld one without the extendable pole, and we found that that works quite well for our vetiver grass. So whenever we want to trim the hedges of vetiver that we have amongst the garden and on the food forest, and it works really well also if you want to cut through the pampa grass, which you also feed to our animals and also like to keep down as a great mulch. So I just wanted to show off how good these saws actually do cut. One thing I think that a lot of people still have the conception of electric chainsaws is that they're somehow not as powerful and they won't do the jobs that they need to do with a petrol chainsaw. So just to clarify, they have power, they're really great, and aside from all the benefits of not needing to top up with your 50-to-1 mix, and not having to ever tune them, not having the issue of taking out the chainsaw to do a quick job and then finding that you have to spend 2 hours tinkering away at it. These are sort of pick up and play. And here we have an old Tasmanian blackwood log that came down about a couple of months ago, and it's an incredibly hard wood. It's really beautiful for furniture. It's called the mahogany of Australia, and it's very dense and can be used for furniture. So we'll just do a little bit of a cut through here, and you can see that it does do an incredible job. And that was on 1 bar, so that's what you were noticing. I should have checked the battery, but yeah, that was on 1 bar. That's what you saw, the little bit of a lag. But yeah, that's an incredibly dense log, and that's about as big a diameter as we ever really end up needing to cut on a regular basis. So there you have it. Go electric.